Some actors become icons because of one legendary role. But what happens after the lightning strike? Tonight, we're diving into the cult era of Linda Blair. Not the headline-making breakthrough, but the late-night cable staples, the gritty revenge thrillers, the haunted mansions, and the strange rental shelf discoveries that kept her name alive throughout the VHS era. These are 10 films where a familiar face shows up in unexpected places and quietly becomes a cult hero. Witchery, La Casa 4, 1988. A group travels to a remote island hotel to inspect it for purchase, only to be stranded when a violent storm cuts off escape. Inside, the building begins to feel alive. Rooms shift in tone, doors refuse to open, and a presence tied to the hotel's past starts asserting control. The haunting is linked to a woman once accused of witchcraft and executed nearby. As tension rises, each death feels less random and more like punishment. The survivors realize they are not simply trapped by weather. They are being judged. Despite its title, this film has no direct narrative connection to the earlier La Casa entries, which themselves were loosely branded Italian releases tied to the Evil Dead phenomenon. Like several films in that unofficial line, it was marketed as a continuation to capitalize on name recognition rather than shared story or characters. The film unfolds as a contained supernatural siege story, with the hotel functioning as both prison and execution ground. Linda Blair appears as one of the stranded guests, delivering a steady performance amid the escalating chaos. Atmosphere carries much of the weight. The island isolation, crashing waves, and Gothic interiors give the story texture even when effects are modest. Practical death scenes and makeup work provide flashes of intensity, but mood is the primary tool. It's late 80s Italian supernatural horror packaged as franchise material, but operating as a standalone haunted hotel thriller. Repossessed, 1990. Years after surviving a demonic possession, a woman finds the nightmare returning. Only this time, it's happening under studio lights. A fame-hungry televangelist sees opportunity instead of danger, turning the exorcism into primetime spectacle complete with sponsors, stage lighting, and breathless commentary. The joke isn't just the possession, it's the commercialization of it. Spiritual crisis becomes ratings bait, and holy ritual is treated like a live event. As the broadcast spirals out of control, the film leans into escalating absurdity rather than tension, pushing each gag bigger than the last. Head spins, levitation, distorted voices, and projectile chaos are all recreated with practical effects, not to unsettle, but to exaggerate. The makeup and prosthetics deliberately echo familiar possession imagery, reshaped into punchlines. Linda Blair returns in a self-aware performance, openly playing against the legacy that made her famous. Ned Beatty's over-the-top televangelist anchors the media satire, while Leslie Nielsen contributes his trademark deadpan delivery to the surrounding chaos. Directed by Bob Logan, the film arrived late in the spoof cycle, and it shows. The humor is broad and intentionally obvious, built on recognition rather than reinvention. It's more pop culture lampoon than sharp satire, a curiosity piece that works best as a meta-footnote in Blair's career, rather than a standout comedy on its own. The Chilling, 1989. A regional cryogenics company promises its wealthy clients a second chance at life, storing their bodies in suspended animation until science catches up with death. When a violent storm knocks out power to the facility, backup systems fail and temperature levels begin to rise. What should have been a temporary outage turns into a biological disaster. The first reanimation is treated as confusion. The second confirms a pattern. Soon the corridors are no longer storage space but hunting ground, with employees scrambling to contain something that was never meant to wake up at all. The building's layout, steel hallways, reinforced doors, freight elevators, becomes both defense and trap. Rather than pushing toward global apocalypse, the story keeps its focus tight. It plays as a locked facility survival thriller, where restoring electricity is just as important as surviving the next encounter. Industrial lighting, alarm systems, and claustrophobic staging do most of the tension work. Linda Blair appears in a supporting role among the trapped staff, adding familiar genre credibility to a cast largely built from direct-to-video regulars. The effects lean into late 80s practicality: pale, frost-bitten skin, restrained gore, and physical zombie movement rather than elaborate makeup transformations. It's not reinventing the undead formula, but it does commit to its contained premise: a corporate immortality experiment collapsing into chaos behind sealed doors. Grotesque, 1988. By the late 80s, horror fans were spoiled for choice in the rental aisles, and Grotesque stood out as one of those titles you grabbed because the cover promised something wild. What you got was a movie that refused to stick to just one lane: part home invasion thriller, part slasher, and part monster movie. The story begins with Linda Blair visiting a friend's mountain home, only for a gang of violent punks to invade and terrorize the family. That alone would have been enough for a gritty exploitation film, but halfway through the movie pivots hard. The family's dark secret is revealed in the form of a disfigured relative, and suddenly it feels like you've stumbled into a different movie entirely. That uneven tone is exactly what gave Grotesque its cult reputation. One moment it's raw and cruel, the next it's drifting into monster movie melodrama. Tab Hunter and Donna Wilkes round out the cast, but it's Blair's presence that anchored the film for horror fans browsing the shelves. Her name alone guaranteed curious renters would give it a shot. Messy and unpredictable, Grotesque may not have the polish of its peers, but that's what made it such a staple of late-night cable and rental oddities. It's a movie you watched not because it was great, but because you had no idea where it was going next. A perfect fit for an era defined by experimentation and excess. Savage Streets, 1984. Savage Streets, directed by Danny Steinman, is a high-energy 1980s exploitation thriller that combines revenge, action, and gritty urban drama. The story follows Brenda, played by Linda Blair, a tough high school student whose life is thrown into chaos when a gang called the Scars commits a horrific crime against her disabled sister and her best friend. Devastated and enraged, Brenda decides to take justice into her own hands. Her quest for vengeance drives the story, as she confronts the violent underworld of Los Angeles with courage, cunning, and relentless determination. From the very beginning, Savage Streets sets a dangerous tone. The streets are treacherous, and Brenda's world is unforgiving. She is a strong and fearless lead who refuses to let her loved ones suffer without consequences. One of the film's most memorable moments comes when she wields a crossbow in a tense and violent showdown, a scene that has become iconic within the genre. The performances are larger than life, in keeping with 1980s exploitation style. Linda Blair delivers a fierce and commanding performance. John Vernon plays the unsympathetic principal, and Linnea Quigley brings emotional stakes as Brenda's sister. The soundtrack pulses with 80s rock, enhancing the sense of energy and tension throughout the film. Savage Streets does not shy away from its sleazy and shocking elements. Nudity, violence, and over-the-top action all combine to create a memorable cult classic. Beyond the chaos, the film is a story about justice, loyalty, and standing up for the people you care about. For fans of 80s revenge thrillers with a strong female lead, Savage Streets is a wild, unforgettable ride. Red Heat, 1985. An American woman traveling in West Germany is framed for drug smuggling by her own boyfriend and sentenced to a harsh women's prison. Once inside, she quickly learns the facility runs on intimidation, corruption, and informal power structures rather than law. Guards abuse authority, inmate factions hold territory, and survival depends on adaptation. Her closest ally becomes a fellow prisoner, a political dissident from East Germany. Their friendship shifts the story's focus from simple endurance to something more dangerous: escape. The Cold War tension enters through that alliance, as ideology and incarceration intersect behind concrete walls. The narrative follows the familiar women in prison arc, humiliation, resistance, retaliation, but it builds toward a coordinated breakout rather than internal reform. Institutional cruelty fuels the first half, while planning and desperation drive the second. Linda Blair anchors the film as the wrongfully imprisoned lead, bringing determination to a role built around resilience. Directed by Robert Collector, the production leans into exploitation conventions, confrontations, authority abuse, and faction violence, while grounding its stakes in betrayal and political imprisonment. It's very much a product of the 80s women in prison cycle, with the Cold War angle serving as texture rather than full political commentary. Hell Night, 1981. College hazing takes a deadly turn when four pledges are locked inside Garth Manor for an all-night initiation. The sprawling Victorian estate comes with quite a history. 12 years ago, the owner killed his deformed children before taking his own life. But as our unfortunate students discover, some family reunions never truly end. What separates Hell Night from standard slasher fare is its Gothic atmosphere and production design. Trading typical teen hangouts for a genuine Gothic mansion gives the film a classic horror feel. The setting is a character itself, all creeping vines, secret passages, and candlelit corridors that would make Vincent Price feel at home. The film takes its time establishing the layout, making the house's geography a crucial part of the survival game. Linda Blair leads the cast as Marty, bringing her horror pedigree to a final girl role that requires more than just screaming. Her character's mechanical knowledge becomes a vital survival skill, while her practical approach to the situation helps ground the supernatural elements. The other pledges aren't just standard victim fodder either. Each gets enough development to make their fate matter. The killers themselves offer a twist on slasher conventions. Instead of a single masked murderer, we get multiple deformed siblings who've been living in the mansion's underground tunnels. Their attacks feel more like a coordinated hunt than standard stalk and slash fare. The makeup effects strike a balance between horrific and tragic, reminding us these monsters were once someone's children. Director Tom DeSimone uses the pledge's awareness of the manor's history to play with expectations. Every creaking floorboard could be their fellow students pulling pranks or something far worse. The film maintains tension by keeping both the pledges and audience guessing about what's real threat and what's hazing ritual until it's too late. Hell Night proves that sometimes the scariest initiations are the ones where the urban legends turn out to be true, and the only way to survive is to face the family secrets buried beneath the floorboards. Ruckus, 1980. A troubled Vietnam veteran wanders into a small Alabama town and immediately draws suspicion from locals who see him as an outsider. What begins as casual hostility escalates when law enforcement and townspeople push him too far. Forced into survival mode, he retreats into the surrounding woods, using his training to stay one step ahead of those hunting him. The conflict builds less as organized warfare and more as reactive resistance. As the posse grows, so does the intensity. The veteran sets traps, creates diversions, and uses the terrain to his advantage, turning the rural landscape into an unpredictable battleground. Dirk Benedict plays the drifter with quiet restraint that gradually shifts into explosive physical action. Linda Blair appears as a compassionate local who offers him support, providing a counterbalance to the hostility around him. The action sequences rely on practical staging, woodland chases, improvised traps, hand-to-hand confrontations, filmed in authentic outdoor locations. The violence is abrupt and grounded rather than stylized, emphasizing tension over spectacle. Released 2 years before First Blood, the film covers similar thematic ground about alienation and returning veterans clashing with small-town authority. Rough around the edges and clearly low budget, it nonetheless anticipates the survival-driven conflict that would soon become more widely known in the genre. Dead Sleep, 1990. The story unfolds inside a psychiatric hospital where routine and silence mask something far less clinical. A night shift nurse begins noticing inconsistencies, patient files that don't align, restricted areas guarded too tightly, and procedures that feel more experimental than therapeutic. What starts as quiet suspicion gradually turns into certainty that something illegal is happening behind locked doors. As she presses for answers, the institution closes ranks. Doctors deflect. Orderlies watch her movements. The deeper she pushes, the clearer it becomes that the hospital itself is structured to suppress scrutiny. Once she threatens to expose what she's uncovered, she's no longer staff, she's a liability. Directed by Alec Mills, the film leans into procedural paranoia rather than overt horror. Conversations in dim corridors carry as much weight as any violent moment. The tension builds from power imbalance, a single employee against an entrenched administrative machine. Linda Blair leads as the investigating nurse, giving the role grounded determination and urgency. Tony Bonner and the supporting cast populate the hospital with figures who shift between cooperative and quietly menacing, keeping allegiances uncertain. Violence is restrained and largely implied, favoring atmosphere over spectacle. Locked wards, fluorescent lighting, and institutional architecture do most of the visual work. It plays as a contained conspiracy thriller, wrapped in medical horror framing. Efficient, serious in tone, and more interested in institutional corruption than shock tactics. Chained Heat, 1983. A young woman enters a women's prison where authority is maintained through manipulation rather than order. The warden operates with quiet corruption. Inmate gangs control the cell blocks, and contraband flows more freely than justice. Survival requires quick alignment, and even quicker instincts. The prison isn't chaotic by accident. It's structured that way. Rival factions compete for dominance while administrators profit from internal unrest, allowing violence and trafficking to keep everyone distracted. As tensions escalate, neutrality becomes impossible, and alliances start to fracture under pressure. Instead of playing as a simple victim narrative, the film positions its lead inside an active power struggle. Strategy matters as much as endurance. Every confrontation shifts the balance slightly, building toward inevitable retaliation. Linda Blair anchors the ensemble as the new inmate forced to adapt, bringing steadiness to a cast packed with genre veterans including Sybil Danning, Stella Stevens, and John Vernon. The performances elevate material that could have easily tipped into parody. Directed by Paul Nicholas, the film embraces exploitation conventions without hesitation: communal showers, brutal punishments, gang clashes, but stages them with confident pacing and clear faction dynamics. It became one of the defining women in prison films of the decade, remembered as much for its cast and structure as for its unapologetic excess. That was our look at 10 cult-era Linda Blair titles that deserve a second spin on the rental shelf. Which one stands out to you? Did we miss a favorite from her VHS years? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoy revisiting these overlooked corners of genre cinema, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next episode of Cult Heroes. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.